Okay, let's look at getting Dynamo open so we can start building within that environment. And the way we approach that is we start with Revit. We have, and we're at our home screen right now. I'm going to open up a new project with the architectural template. Wait for that to open for a second. And once we do, the first thing we're going to look for is the Manage tab. I got to move this over. This always bothers me why it doesn't show up on the screen properly. And I'm going to go to Manage. And we're going to go to the visual programming environment, which is Dynamo. And we'll select that. And it'll take a minute for Dynamo to open. Because I'm working on one monitor for the video tutorial, we're going to use Dynamo covering the full screen. Right behind it, if I shut this down just a little bit, you can see that Revit is still in the background. And these two are connected to each other now once we start opening up a file, but mostly we'll stay on the front screen. So I'll have both of these set up for a full screen environment so it's easier to see things. So this is the Dynamo start screen, just like the Revit start screen. We can open up a new document or an existing one. A custom node we'll discuss later. And there's some helpful references. The Dynamo primer is an excellent way to learn Dynamo, and there's some samples, sample projects, which are all really rich, and they continue to advance down through these. So those are all available from the start screen. But for us today, what we're going to do is we're just going to start with a new project. Once I click that, immediately we're into our building environment. The screen will look probably different for you. You'll have all of these definitions and probably none of these. These are things that I've added on in the development of my other projects. So the first thing I want to do is kind of, well, just go over the, I guess, some of the interface. A lot of this I'll say just very quickly because you'll remember it from using it. This allows us to look at objects that we create. This allows us to look at nodes. Very hard until we've got the screen constructed. But if you want to navigate from anything that we construct, like a box or whatever, we'll select this, and then we can rotate around it. And when we want to get back to the visual programming environment, we click this. Both exist on the screen simultaneously. The most important thing that's not clear about this interface is this idea of we're doing computational programming, which means that the program has to execute, run through a set of scripts. And right now it's set for automatic, but it can be set for manual. The only time we'd want to have this set for manual is, and this could be a lot of the time, is when our computations get very long and involved. We want to make changes and not have it recalculate everything until we've completed a certain series of tasks. We also might want to have it in manual mode if we're trying to debug or find something that's causing it to lock up. In this case, I'm going to leave it set for automatic. And we're going to go ahead and put our first thing down. Our goal here is to actually create an array of points that we can assign objects to. Just like tiling a floor, we're going to define a series of points on a plane. So we'll start that by looking at there's two ways to get to our nodes. One is through this palette over here, which is just searching them. And the other one is, if you know the name of it, you can right-click on the screen and actually search right from the screen. In this case, our first one we're going to do is we're going to look in this palette, and we're going to look for a point, because we want to start with one point, and it will be in the geometry. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to go down to points, and I'm going to select points. Now there's points in UV space, which is more complicated. That's curvilinear space. And then there's points in XYZ space. We're going to open that one up. And the first thing you will see is sometimes these things have multiple functions, or excuse me, the same name with different functions. In this case, we have by coordinates XYZ or by coordinates XY. And I'm going to select by coordinates XYZ. And I'll click that, and it shows up on the desktop. And the moment it does, you'll notice that a point showed up, and it has arrows to indicate X, Y, and Z axis. If at any time I want the object that I put on the desktop to disappear, I can hide it by right-clicking and turning the preview off, and it will disappear, and the box will turn this gray color. We're going to leave this visible for now. And we're going to look at the first idea to being able to move that point coordinate by changing one of its values. The way we're going to do that is we're going to insert a number, and we specifically need a little node in order to enter a number. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to start typing in number. And there's a bunch of different numbers, and we'll go through and start using at least these first two. But I'm going to grab number, and I'm going to type in, let's say 10. And we can watch what happens when we plug this into the different coordinates. For instance, I'll drag a wire over to the X, and the point moves over 10 units in the X direction. If I pull it off and hook it to the Y, it moves in the Y direction. And then if I put it in the Z, it'll move up in the Z direction. So we have one point, but we really want to have multiple points. So what we're going to do is I'm going to delete this. I'm going to right click and say remove. And I'm going to make a sequence of numbers. And I'm going to use a kind of a shortcut, a way of entering a series of numbers. And I'm going to use a tool called a code block. So I'm going to right click with my mouse. I'm going to start typing in code block. And that'll show up pretty quickly. It's the top one. I'll select that. And this allows you to put in numbers and or words or just a whole host of things, and it will try to make some kind of logical sense out of them for you to use it for input and output. That'll become clear as we move along through the project. So the first thing I want to do is make a series of numbers from 0, and this is the way it's written, ... to 20, ... by units of 2. So we're going from 0 to 20 foot with 2 foot spacing basically. And if I click off of that, it'll automatically enter a semicolon, and then they'll give that this little arrow showing that I can actually take that and connect it to something else. But right away, let's look at what that list is. So if I roll over this and down onto the top of the list, you see that there's a list from 0 to 10, but the numbers go from 0 to 20 because they're incrementing in units of 2. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. So we have a total of 11 objects. Now let's plug that in and see what happens. And now we get 11 points along the x-axis. And if I put it on the y-axis, we get it on the y. Now, if we plug both of them in, we get a diagonal, which means that it's looking at the first point of the list with the first point of the list repeated. So we get a one-to-one relationship with each other. But we really want it to look at the first one 11 times, the second one 11 times, so as to be a squared function or a cross product. So I need to change the way this looks at these two numbers. This is a relatively complicated concept to introduce very early, but you'll notice it's really important to getting through this, this project quickly. So I'm going to right click on the node, and I'm going to change the way it looks at those two lists, and I want to change it to cross product. And when I do, you'll notice that now the array becomes a 11 by 11 array, and that is 11 points this way times 11, so it's 121 points. And if we look here, we have a list. And that's a list of lists. So just as I said, there's a list of 10 list of 10 points. And if I was to do what's called a watch box, I'll do that quickly. I'm going to go right click and go watch. And we'll open this up in a more, oops. So now I can slide down this and I can show you how we have, these are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So with this 11 list with 11 in each one of them. So that's how we get to 21. And if we were to look at what the original list looks like by plugging that in, you notice we only have one list of 11 items. So that's kind of just a brief introduction to what's going on with arrays. And the next thing we'll look at is how to add objects to these arrays and move this array up into what would be a ceiling level for our project.